Last time we were able to set up our JWT authentication scheme, and now our application is able to recognize the user when we send the token in the authorization. So in this video, what I want us to do is to go ahead and set up a way that the user who logs in can go ahead and create and retrieve some resources on our server. So the resource we're going to be working with, of course, is going to be a ToDo model. We've already created our ToDo's app. So we want to come in the ToDo's app and set up a ToDo model, and then we can work with it. So before we get to that, one thing you would have noticed is when we set up the JWT authentication scheme to work across our application. So if we come to our settings, you can see that we set it up to work as the default authentication class, meaning that Django Rest Framework is going to be using this to protect all our views. So there are some views that we may not want Django Rest Framework to first try to authenticate a user before it can give access to the view itself. So for those kinds of classes, what we want is we want to override the setting by setting up the authentication classes list. So here we can have an empty one. And when we set up a property here, this is the setting that Django Rest Framework is going to be using if we set it up on the view level. So if we don't, it's going to fall back to using what we have in the settings, and that might not work for views like login, that we might not need to check the token. So to show you how that one is, if I comment this and I try to log in again here, you said the data token not valid, but we don't want it to check for those things. So we're going to set an empty list of authentication classes. And now if we try it, you can see that it's working. We would have to do this even for the other set of views that we don't want authentication on, that are open to access. So even here, we on register, we can have it. And other cases I can think of are things like resetting a password. So let's continue to creating our ToDo model. So the first thing we want to do is have a way to construct how our relation is going to look like. And for people who are not familiar, a relation is basically a database table. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import our tracking model. You guys remember the tracking model, it's in helpers, I believe. So we can do helpers, those models, import tracking model. So this helps us to add the 2 timestamp fields, the updated that and the created that, and it kind of manages things like the ordering for us, so we can reuse this on many models we might have in our application. So here, let's have a class for the ToDo. So whenever you're defining a model class, you want to make sure it's a singular version of what it contains. So if it's for ToDos, then call it ToDo. If it's for products, call it product, and so forth. So then we are going to be inheriting from our tracking model. So when we inherit from our tracking model, now we can add our own fields. So for our ToDo, we want it to have the title. It's going to be a char field. We can specify a max length. We need to import models here. So from django.db, import models. Okay. So we're also going to have a description. So I'm going to say desk. It's going to be a text field. I'm sure we're going to keep it short. Then the other thing we're going to need is complete. So we're going to have is complete there. It's going to be a Boolean field, not a Boolean text field. So this one is going to be false by default. So we can set a default. So default is going to be false until the user can manually come in and say, okay, this one is done. Okay, so probably here we want to have a string representation of this class so that it can become readable whenever we are viewing it, like in the admin or in the terminal. So here we can have a def under str, and then for it we can return the title. We can say self.title. Okay, so it's adding this typing. I'm going to remove the typing for sure, such that we just keep it simple and neater. So here we need to also have another attribute for owner. So it's going to be a foreign key. Now, when you define a foreign key, you want to specify the model that this ToDo is going to be attached to. Now we're going to use our own user model. So we're going to need to import it from authentication. So from authentication models, import user. Then we can reference it here. Another thing we need to pass here that is mandatory is what should happen when the owner gets deleted. Now, most of the times what you want is to delete even the ToDos that owner had, because no one would care anymore. Or sometimes you might have other use cases like you want to keep all the records. Maybe you need them for something. But here you specify on delete. And then what we want is we want to cascade, meaning we want to also delete the to-dos that were associated with that owner. Now that we're done here, we're going to go to the views and set up a view that will handle how to create a to-do. Now, Django Rest Framework provides certain views that we can use to handle this, but the one that will handle that use case is the Create API view. So we're going to need to first import it from generics, from Rest Framework, generics, import. So it's going to be Create API view. And then we can set up our view class. So we can say class create API view. So I'm going to call it create to do API view, and then we'll make it inherit from create API view. Okay. So when we inherit from create API view, Django Rest Framework automatically handles the post. So whenever a user is making a post request to this, it is handled under the scene. So what we want to do is to tell it a few things, and it's going to be able to handle the creation. The first thing it's going to require from us is how to serialize the data that it gets. Because if you think of it, whenever we go to like Postman and we make an API call to our server, we are sending JSON, right? But that JSON has to be turned into a model object and saved into our database. So the serializer can be something that sits in the middle of our views and our database, making sure that the data formats can be understood by different clients and our server. So we're going to go here. So I've created the serializers.py file. So over here, what we want is to set up that class that's going to be responsible to serialize our object, our to-do objects. So here, I'm going to import serializers from REST framework. I'm going to do REST framework.serializers. So we're going to get a model serializer, since for the most part, everything we want this serializer to do will basically be create, read, update our model. So what we can do is we can inherit from model serializer. And then when we head from model serializer, we can come here and set up our serializer class. So we're going to call it to do serializer. Then let it inherit from model serializer. So here what we want is set up a class meta. So in the class meta, then we can define other information that this serializer should know about. One of them is going to be the model. So we need to set model to our to do, that it knows what things like what fields to check for. Let's now import our model. So from to-dos, import to-do. This is going to be .models. Okay, so we set it up here. Then another thing we need to do is set up the list of fields. So those are going to be the fields we want our serializer to be able to serialize back and forth. So I'm going to go to our model and get almost all of them: title, description, and then is complete. So title, description is complete. So for the owner, we are going to be handling the attaching an owner to a to-do within our view. So here, what we want is now to specify the serializer class. So we can do serializer class. Then we can set it to do serializer. So when I do that, it's going to import for me. Make sure you get that import there. If it doesn't come for you, make sure you import it. So another thing we need to set up is, since this is going to be a view that we need the user to first authenticate to be able to access, we are going to now set permission classes on this view. So we're going to do permission classes, and then we are going to need the user to be authenticated. So let's import permissions from REST framework. So .permissions import. We need is authenticated, and that's the one we want to add here. So it needs to be an iterable, so we'll put an comma at the end, so it's a tuple. Okay, so now that we have that, we need to be able to tell the Django Rest framework that when it is creating this to do, it should set the owner to the person who is currently logged in or who is making that request. So what we can do here is we can override a method called perform create. Okay. So when we say perform create, then we can return serializer.save, and then we can specify that the owner should be the person who is logged in. So we can say owner equals self.request.user. Okay. So since we already have specified that the user should be logged in, then we should be able to get that user and attach them when the Django Rest Framework is creating this to do. So now that we have our create setup, what we need to do is hook it up in the URLs so that our applications can know about it and people can access it from the outside, from outside our application. So I'm going to go to the urls.py and set up a URLs patterns. Now we need a path. So then we can say, okay, we're going to now look out for when a user is hitting the create, and then we're going to be rendering our view. So I'm going to come over here and import our views. So from ToDo's views, import. So we need create ToDo APIView. So that's the one we are going to now render when a user hits the create. And then we want to code as view on it. And then we can give it a unique name. So let's say create ToDo. So let's also import path from Django URLs. So from Django URLs. So now that we have our URL patterns, we need to tell our main routing file about them. So I'm going to come over here, just like we did for the authentication, and do for the same thing for the to-dos too. So it's going to be from to-dos, from APIs to-dos. We're going to be rendering all the routes patterns in the to-dos.urls module, which are going to be everything we have added here. We need to not forget to run our migrations for the to-do, and also make sure our database is synced with the new table we wanted to create. So I'm going to stop the server, and then here I'm going to run Python manage.py, make migrations. And it's going to go ahead and create a to-do migration. And then we need to migrate this so that the table gets created. So here we can run Python manage.py, migrate. And that should go ahead and create all our database tables. So here, now we can run back our application. So I'm going to do run server. Our application is back. So I'm going to go to Postman and try it out. So I'm going to come and duplicate this one here. So duplicate it. And let me rename it to create ToDo. So now we are going to be hitting to-dos /create. And now we are going to be handling the post, because that is the method that Create APIView handles for us. So now if we come and make this request, hey, by the way, we have our token here set up. So I'm going to come here and say send. And you can see we have an error. Let's see what this is about. We get update sequence elements. Okay, let's see. So we have this error in URLs. This looks something to do with our to-do URLs. So over here, we need to specify a name here and set it to create to-do. So let's try again. I'm going to hit send again. And now you can see we get no such user. That's because this header has been here, I think, for a long time. So we are not able to authenticate this user. So I'm going to come here and log in. And now if we take this token and use it in our create API view, so I'm going to go to our create one. So did we lose it? Let's see. Looks like we did. Create post. And then we are going to say go to authentication and then choose bearer and use this new token. So I'm going to go to the body and I also add some body. So I'll choose raw, then I'll choose JSON. So over here, now we can create our JSON object. Let's say we want to have a title of title. Let's have a description, which is this of hello world. Is complete is going to be false by default. So now if we post this, notice that we get this being sent to us and we get a 201 created. So meaning that on our server, we are able to create this resource, and the Django Rest Framework is handling that for us under the hood. So the next thing we are going to need to do here to make sure this was created, of course, is to retrieve it. So I'm going to go to the views and also set up a view that can retrieve this. So over here, we can have a class. So I'm going to have a class. It's going to be called to-do list API view. So here we are going to be inheriting from the list API view. So that is the one that implements for us the get methods that are responsible to send back a list of items to the user. So over here, we're going to inherit from list API view. And then that's the one you're going to have here. Make sure I import it and then we inherit from it here. Now what we need to define here, of course, is the Serializer class. So here we can have a to-do Serializer. Another thing will be the permission classes, because we want the user to be logged in. So permission classes, it's going to be is authenticated. All right. Then the other thing that we must specify here is the query set. what kind of objects do we want the Django Rest Framework to send back to the current user? So it's clear to us that we want to be sending only the items that were created by the current user. So what you want to do is normally you would have something like query set equals something like to-dos. Of course, we need to import to-do dot objects dot all, something like this. When you have an authentication system and you want to use the current logged in user to construct which objects are sent back to them, what you want is you want to override the get query set method. So here I'm going to override get query set like this. And what you can do now is instead of using this as a property here, we can just return to do.objects. Then we want to do filter. So when you say filter, I want filter by the owner, who is the current logged in user. Okay, like this. So this is all we need to do. Now let's hook it up to our URLs. So I'm going to come here also and I duplicate this. Let's also import the list, to-do list API view. Make sure it's the one we are having here. So here we can have like list and then list to-dos. Okay. And now if we save and come back to our browser, I'm going to now make a get request to to-dos/list. Okay. So you can see that now we get a list of to-dos being sent back. So if we go ahead to post more here, I'm going to go to create again. Then I will put here something different. I will post. We get a 201 created. Let me do it again. And now if we come back to the get, we want to go to the list. We run this. You can start now. We get a list of all the items that we have created.